If you have already watched this introductory information, you can skip ahead no more than 10 minutes. Hello, welcome. I am predicting that Vice President Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash in St. Louis due to a bird strike into Busch Stadium. In the area code 314, it will be a burning bush, as described in Exodus 3:14. On December 24th, 2024, she will be replaced by Michelle Obama. And then Barack Obama will replace Michelle. It is predicted that President Trump will die from a heart attack on December 26th, 2024. It is also predicted that Trump's heart attack will be triggered by a directed energy weapon that will target Trump through Bluetooth technology. The components inside the pointy thing that Trump took will facilitate this, and it is believed that when Trump visited Biden at the White House, Trump's Bluetooth MAC address was obtained, which will be used to target Trump with a directed energy weapon. It is predicted that on December 25th, Joe Biden will suffer a stroke. After Kamala Harris's predicted plane crash on December 24th and Joe Biden's predicted stroke on December 25th, it is predicted that Joe Biden will replace Kamala Harris with Michelle Obama as the vice president. Per the 20th Amendment, Congress will vote to make Michelle Obama the temporary president. It is predicted that Joe Biden will then step down and Michelle Obama will become the 47th president, and then she will appoint Barack Obama as the 51st vice president. It is then predicted that she will step down on January 12th and Barack Obama will become the 48th president. I am predicting that former President Jimmy Carter will die on January 28th. It is predicted that on April 20th, 2025, there will be an outbreak of monkeypox or Marburg disease or both. April 20th will be a symbolic beginning to a new pandemic. Alternatively, it could also be that the symbolic beginning to the new pandemic will be on April 1st, 2025, and that on April 20th, 2025, martial law will be declared because of the new outbreak. It is predicted that on June 9th, the day after the rapture, the key will open the bottomless pit and fallen angels will cross over into the earthly realm. June 9th will be a symbolic beginning to the fifth trumpet judgment that is described in Revelation chapter 9, when the demonic realm collides with the earthly realm. June 9th will be a symbolic beginning to demons pretending to be aliens. The demons pretending to be aliens will claim to be here to help us with our nuclear weapons after Damascus, Syria is destroyed with a nuclear weapon the day before June 9th. And it is possible that June 9th will be the day Pope Francis will announce that aliens have arrived and have made him the ambassador for the world. This will immediately give Pope Francis, the Antichrist, supreme power over governments of the world. At some point, there will be a massive Mary apparition that will deceive the masses, because all Mary apparitions in history have been demons pretending to be Mary. June 9th will be a symbolic beginning to a zombie pandemic and the masses becoming demonically possessed that will be facilitated through the thing, which is the mark of the Antichrist and 5G frequencies. June 9th will be a symbolic beginning to the coming genocide politicide in America. I am predicting that singer-songwriter Paul Simon will die on August 1st, 2025. It is predicted that on August 6th, 2025, the historic barge that has been stuck on the rocks of the Niagara River for over 100 years will finally break free and crash over Niagara Falls. The reason for this is that Niagara Falls is Noah's flood symbolism, and the barge was involved in the most dramatic rescue in the history of Niagara Falls, symbolic of Noah's Ark. Niagara in the native language means straight, narrow way, and Niagara's Horseshoe Falls is perfectly aimed at the CN Tower in downtown Toronto, because Toronto and its tower are symbolic of the Tower of Babel. In a game of horseshoes, the object is to aim the horseshoe and throw it at the metal stick, which is why the Horseshoe Falls is perfectly aimed at the metal stick that is the CN Tower. God is communicating that as testament for those who will live in the 1,000 years of Christ's reign on earth, the geography of North America will, as a result of a massive earthquake, be divided by a body of water from the Great Lakes to the Mississippi Delta. This destruction will be judgment on America and Canada for attempting to divide God's land, Israel. When this happens, the water in the Great Lakes will spill out over southern Ontario and Toronto. I am predicting that a solar flare will erupt on the surface of the sun and send a coronal mass ejection that will hit Earth on August 13th, 2025, which will knock out America's power grid and will lead to food shortages. The hit of the coronal mass ejection, predicted for August 13th, that will knock out the power grid will also knock many planes out of the sky. I am predicting that on August 23rd, 2025, there will be a catastrophic asteroid hit of Earth, which will trigger the eruption of Yellowstone volcano and will cause the volcano in the Canary Islands to collapse into the Atlantic Ocean and send a mega tsunami towards the east coast. The asteroid will also trigger a mega landslide on Hawaii Island that will trigger a mega tsunami that will hit the west coast. It will also trigger the collapse of the Hoover Dam, which will cause a water panic in California, and many other devastating earthquakes. The day of the Lord, the second coming of Lord Jesus Christ, Judgment Day, will be at the end of 2026. The date that this video is posted proves that these predictions are being made ahead of time, as do these time-stamped emails and forensic notes PDF documents. If you are skeptical for some reason, please email me and I will forward these to you. Believe me, I know far better than you how the prediction made in this video was derived. And more importantly, I know far better than you why the righteous Christian God of the Bible has given me a voice through this prediction. If you are a quote-unquote Christian or Muslim, this prediction was not learned through a demon. Be warned that blaspheming the Holy Spirit is the unforgivable sin. If you are a New Ager or New Spirituality person, this prediction was not learned through somehow tapping into the supposed universal collective consciousness. If you are a conspiracy theorist, this prediction was not learned through figuring out a supposed code that the Illuminati and Satanists are using. This prediction was learned through the Bible and through watching carefully the Lord's prophetic signs, which Jesus commanded all Christians to do. Besides proving that Jesus Christ is the Lord, the reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction is to prove that the controversial things that I am saying in the videos on this channel are the truth. Therefore, a wise person will want to watch all of the videos on this channel. What I will also do is create a video or two that summarizes some of the controversial things that the Lord will prove to be true when the prediction being made in this video comes to pass. I will leave links to these must-watch videos in the description box below this video. Again, the purpose of this prediction, that is from God, is to prove these things that I will talk about. And therefore, it would be foolish to not watch the videos that I will leave links for in the description box below this video. Make a note right now of these alternative platforms that you can find me on in case you can't find me later. This video will talk about the truly amazing connections between God's prophetic signs that God was demonstrating ahead of time to point to November 27th. This video was produced prior to November 27th. God was pointing to November 27th ahead of time in regards to the predicted death of Kamala Harris in a plane crash, and it ended up being another step in the trail of signs. And this is how it works. God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel, is an interconnected web, and the full intended meaning of any of the prophetic signs cannot be properly understood without their context and connections to the other prophetic signs. This engenders these steps in the trail of signs leading to the particular event, in this case, the death of Kamala Harris in a plane crash. And it is through these trails of signs and interconnected signs that God is able to tell very amazing, important stories through which he is able to communicate essential, extremely important information and knowledge. That's why all of these videos that are predicting November 27th must be watched. This is also the case for the 70 videos that I made that led Trails of Signs to February 10th, 2024. They absolutely must be watched. I could not continue to update these videos with the Trail of Signs as it progressed further. There was just too many of them. So there are 70 videos filled with these essential stories that everyone needs to know. God has been communicating the death of Kamala Harris in a plane crash since 2020. And there is so much other information that you need to know, and it is contained in these 70 other videos. If you do not watch these other videos, you will have missed entirely the point of this prediction that is from God. It isn't simply to say, neat, amazing, wow, God, you predicted this. If God wanted to, he could simply tap someone on the shoulder and say, hey, tell the world that such and such is going to happen on such and such date. But what would that be good for? Like I am saying, it is through these interconnected signs that God is telling these stories and conveying this information and knowledge that needs to be known. In other words, make sure that you also watch the videos that are predicting the death of Kamala Harris in a plane crash on February 10th. The analysis is 100% correct. If you have already watched this 8-minute clip explaining the prophetic signs that occurred on November 27th, please be patient. It is necessary that I explain what happened on November 27th and how it revealed adding an additional 9 + 9 + 9 days to get to the date it is predicted that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash on December 24th. And if you have already watched this explanation for November 27th, you can skip ahead 8 minutes. After this 8-minute clip, I will get into the truly astounding information and subject of this particular video. This diagram that you are looking at here is truly profound, and there is a lot to explain. And God, through all of this, told very important and amazing stories that everyone needs to know. And this diagram and the full explanation for what happened and why it is relevant, what happened, the prophetic signs that occurred on November 27th, are explained in the 9/11 Mayor video. The video that is titled Trump Will Die, Prediction Trump Will Die on December 12th, Harris Will Crash on December 24th, equals the 9/11 Mayor, a man that God is using in his prophetic signs for very important symbolism, which points to the big warning of judgment on 9/11. Most importantly, that is the underlying symbolism, but there is so much that God has told through the 9/11 Mayor, which will be explained in the 9/11 Mayor video. But for the sake of continuity in this video, to explain the trail of signs, as I have just now explained, we have established a trail of signs that led to November 27th. November 27th is 9 plus 9 plus 9 days before December 24th, the date it is predicted that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash. God pairs 9 and 11 together to confirm the signs and connections, and that is because it points to 9/11. And that's why we have this connection involving 9 and 11 and the 9/11 mayor. On this day, the 9/11 mayor stood outside of the courthouse that he is being persecuted in by his political enemies in New York City, in the 11th state. New York City, incidentally, is also made up of 11 letters. On 9/11, it was Flight 11 with a crew of 11 people that flew into the Twin Towers that looked like a giant 11 in New York State, the 11th state to join the Union, because Jesus coined the phrase the 11th hour, which in ancient Israel referred to the last hour of daylight before darkness, and in English is an idiom that means last chance. Time is running out. And so the prophetic sign that we expected in advance was Rudy Giuliani, the 9/11 mayor, announcing to the world in front of the press, in front of the courthouse, where he is being persecuted, that he no longer has a bank account. And this date, a primary reason why or how this date was known ahead of time was because of the connection to the Emergencies Act with the trucker freedom protest in Ottawa, which was about the restriction or restricting of the political dissidents' bank accounts. It was exactly 145 weeks in between these two signs involving bank accounts, because 145 is the 49th semi-prime number, and we are talking about the death of Kamala Harris, the 49th vice president. There's lots to say. The trucker protest was a convoy of trucks across the continent parallel to the border wall of security with America, the 49th parallel. 49 is 7 times 7. The trucker protest began exactly 7 times 7 years after 7 justices voted to legalize abortions in the Supreme Court, and Harris is most known for advocacy for abortions. This controversial law was made in a courthouse. The Emergencies Act is a controversial law. The 9/11 mayor was Trump's lawyer who spoke the truth regarding the controversial shoplifted referendum, and this prophetic sign involving the law taking away his bank account occurred in front of a courthouse. To wrap things up here, this was Thanksgiving. This date was known ahead of time because it was the day before Thanksgiving. Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash the day before Christmas on her flight back from Washington, D.C. to Los Angeles. Again, God repeats a number 3 times for emphasis of its symbolic meaning, which is the reason for 9 plus 9 plus 9 days connected to this sign in New York. And it is relevant that it is in New York, because also it connects to the day that the New York State Bar removed Giuliani's law license in New York State. And also this date is exactly 211 weeks after this other 9/11 mayor sign, and on, and 211 hints at 2 times 110 stories of the Twin Towers that collapsed on 9/11. 211 is the 15th super prime number. Rudy Giuliani was sued for $150 million, which is why he doesn't have a bank account. And this date is predicted to be 15 days before it is predicted that Trump, who is from New York and Manhattan, also will die. This connection of 211 weeks, which I can't explain much more, this end of the diagram in this video, it's explained in the Giuliani 9/11 mayor video, but this connection is also 404% of a calendar year. This 9/11 mayor sign was on the exact 400-year anniversary of the Pilgrims anchoring off Cape Cod and signing the Mayflower Compact, the predecessor to the Constitution. The sign on this date, this 9/11 mayor sign on the date 11/11, the Mayflower Compact was signed on the date 11/11, exactly 400 years earlier. This sign on this date was Giuliani's podcast, in which he, for the first time, laid out a comprehensive case of all of the evidence that the referendum had been shoplifted, which meant the end of democracy. This symbolized the beginning of democracy, and the end of democracy was symbolized with the 9/11 mayor and his case regarding the evidence on this day. And of course, the reason why Giuliani doesn't have a bank account and was sued this amount of money was for speaking the truth regarding the shoplifted referendum. And also, this 9/11 mayor sign on this date was 404 years after the Pilgrims arrived, and the Pilgrims symbolized Thanksgiving, and again, this was the Thanksgiving sign that we expected in advance. 404 years and 404% of a calendar year hint at the 44th president, the Antichrist, who is symbolized by the king of Egypt in the Bible, and the Israelites escaped the persecution from the king of Egypt after 400 years in Egypt and then were led to the promised land. The Pilgrims saw their crossing of the Atlantic and their escape from the king of England and religious persecution, like the Israelites, as being analogous to the Israelites' departure from Egypt and crossing over the Jordan River into their promised land, their crossing of the Atlantic into the New World. The 44th president will become the Antichrist king after the death of Trump and Harris in a plane crash. And once he becomes the president and the Antichrist, he will restrict people's ability to buy and sell food based on their having taken or whether or not they have taken the mark of the Antichrist. In other words, bank accounts will be controlled, and this is why it is relevant that this coming death of Kamala Harris in a plane crash connects through these signs involving 9/11, which was about plane crashes, through the 9/11 mayor, and through the restriction of bank accounts of the left's political enemies, true conservatives and Christians. All right, welcome. I'm excited to explain this extremely amazing information that was just learned this morning. Speaking of which, this morning is November 22nd. As you can see here, this email was composed on November 21st. So it is before November 27th, the date it is predicted that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash in St. Louis, next to the Gateway Arch into the Major League Baseball stadium. She will crash into a baseball stadium, and I'll explain how that's relevant to this particular video. So, the prophetic sign we received on November 21st revealed all of this, which was the fall of Matt Gaetz. So Matt Gaetz was nominated by President Trump to be the next Attorney General for the Department of Justice, and some days later, he stepped down from that. He declined the nomination. Okay, so it was the fall of Gaetz because he wanted to take this job, but he felt that it was too much of a distraction from the Trump transition because of some controversy regarding Gaetz's past. And also, truthfully, the deeply state not wanting this guy as the head of them, if you will, because he was coming after them. We all know that. So, but anyway, that's why the animosity of the enemies of the conservatives and Christians being opposed to Matt Gaetz. That's the deeper truth. But let's begin with the prophetic sign. So Matt Gaetz fell. Okay, his fall on November 21st is 6 days before Harris's predicted fall at the Gateway Arch into a baseball stadium. And I'm just actually, when I'm writing this, at first I was just actually writing this randomly to a friend. And then I realized something was up here, and as it progressed. But I was really just jotting down some thoughts. But it all became really, really important. Okay, so this reminds me of the famous play, the most famous play in World Series history, baseball World Series history, when Bill Buckner, number 6, missed the ball hit by Mookie Wilson, number 1. The reason why this reminded me of this is because of the numbers. Gaetz represents the 1st District of Florida. Okay, so his stepping down from becoming the Attorney General 6 days before Harris's predicted crash gives us the 6, and he is the representative of the 1st District from which he resigned after being nominated for the position of Attorney General. So the 1st District and 6 days gives us a 1 and a 6. And it had to have been the Holy Spirit that made me remember this combination of 1 and 6 involved in the extremely prophetic, most famous play in World Series history when Mookie Wilson hit the ball softly, very easy ground ball to player number 6, Mookie Wilson being player number 1, and Bill Buckner missed the ball. So let's talk about that. The Boston Red Sox in 1986 played the New York Mets in the World Series, and they were 1 out away from winning the World Series. And this was the final out. It should have been the final out. So Bill Buckner missed the ball, and he lived the rest of his life regretting this. So it was, he had a good career, but he'll always be remembered for this particular play. But this story goes back long before Bill Buckner, because it's part of what people call the Boston Red Sox curse, or the curse of the Bambino, a supposed sports curse that dates back to 1918, the last time previously that the Boston Red Sox had won the World Series. Okay? Now in 1918, the Boston Red Sox played the Chicago Cubs. And it came out after, I don't know how long after, but it came out sometime after this 1986 World Series that Bill Buckner, inside his first baseman's glove, was wearing his lucky Chicago Cubs batting glove, because he had been, before playing for the Red Sox, he played for the Cubs. So he was wearing a Cubs piece of art, an article of clothing. It was the batting glove, and it had a Cubs logo on it and everything. It was his Cubs batting glove, right? But he was wearing it without anyone else knowing underneath, inside his first baseman's glove. And if you've seen the play, and if you haven't, I recommend just looking it up on YouTube. The ball just misses his glove. It goes right by his glove. He puts his glove towards the ground, because it's the easiest ground ball ever, and it just goes right by him. Okay? Right underneath his glove. And so that's the thing. And so this sports curse goes back to the 1918 World Series, but also the Chicago Cubs had a famous sports curse. They also hadn't won the World Series since 1918, or since before 1918. Okay? Now, why is this? There's only 3 very famous sports curses, if you will, in baseball history. The Chicago White Sox, the Chicago Cubs, and Boston Red Sox. Those 3 teams. The following year, in 1919, the World Series was between the Chicago White Sox and the Cincinnati Reds. Now, that series is known in history as being the Black Sox series when the cheating scandal unfolded, where the players, 8 of them, 4+4, threw the World Series in order to capitalize on sports betting. All right, now Matt Gaetz, by the way, fell 4+4 days after he was nominated. That's a parallel. As I'll explain, you'll see. So the reason and there was a famous movie in the 80s made about this called 8 Men Out. 8 Men Out, okay, about the 1919 Chicago White Sox cheating scandal. Now, as a result of that cheating scandal, in a moment of crisis in baseball, the major league team owners created a new position, just like Matt Gaetz' position. The new position was Commissioner of Baseball. He was given this person whose name was nicknamed Judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis. And he was given unchecked power over every person in baseball in a moment of crisis. The date on which he was given that power was exactly 666 days after the 6+6+6th Amendment was ratified, which was the amendment regarding prohibition, the restriction on buying and selling alcohol. In Bible prophecy, the Antichrist is said to be a part of the Antichrist system that will restrict the buying and selling of food, that will be rationed to only those who take the mark of the Antichrist, the so-called good citizens. Okay, and so this is these curses. So we have the 3 teams, the Chicago White Sox, Chicago Cubs, and Boston Red Sox, playing in the World Series in 1918 and 1919. And coincidentally, all 3 of those teams are the teams involved in the curses. All 3 of those curses were broken or ended during the time that Barack Obama was in Washington, D.C. There's lots to say about that. The final one was the Chicago Cubs winning in 2016, and then they visited Barack Obama, the 44th president, at the White House 4 days before he left office, and on that day he was given jersey number 44 by star player for the Cubs, number 44. Okay, and that was the symbolic ending to these curses, because all of this points to the Antichrist curse. And again, that's also why it was 4+4 men, 8 men out that were involved in the cheating scandal in 1919 that led to the first commissioner of baseball, who is symbolism for the Antichrist and the coming curse of the Antichrist. Okay, now those 3 teams, Chicago White Sox, Chicago Cubs, and Boston Red Sox, gives us red, white, and blue. The Red Sox gives us red, the White Sox gives us white, and the Chicago Cubs are also nicknamed the Blue Bears. So it's red, white, and blue. 2 of those teams are Chicago, and Barack Obama is known for being from Chicago. The 44th president is from Chicago. That's part of this revelation that this is all pointing to the curse of the Antichrist. Okay, now the Boston Red Sox won their, and by the way, the reason for, so what a lot of people don't realize or know is that, yes, it's known that the 1919 World Series was not legitimate and it was thrown for sports betting profits. But what's not widely known is this is the same with the 1918 World Series between the Red Sox and the Cubs. This is bringing us back to Bill Buckner, who played for the Red Sox and was wearing, at the time of the most famous play in World Series history, the Chicago Cubs batting glove. It points back to the 1918 World Series when these 2 teams played each other. And again, Bill Buckner and his failed play is part of the curse because the Boston Red Sox ended up losing that World Series, thus continuing their curse of not having won a World Series since 1918. Okay, when they played the Cubs. It's amazing. Now, the Boston Red Sox in that World Series, they won the World Series 4-2. The final game was won on the date 9/11 in 1918. 4-2 hints at 42, which is this number that symbolizes the Antichrist in Bible prophecy, or the period of the Antichrist. And that's because the period of the Antichrist is symbolized by 42 months. But believe me, the 42 months has already begun. That begun in May of 2021. And the prediction being made in this video will prove this. And this is the purpose of this prediction from God. Make no mistake, I know far better than you the reason for this prediction from God. It is to prove what I have just said. The 42 months is only symbolic, all right? I've explained this in other videos at more length. But 42 months in Bible prophecy of 30 days each for a month is 1,260 days. And the Red Sox won this World Series on 9/11 in 1918, exactly 1,260 months after 9/11 in 1813, which was the day that the British landed at Washington's Mount Vernon estate before they proceeded to burn down the White House and the Capitol building in Washington. Okay, and that day, 9/11 in 1813, was exactly 188 months before the only other time in history that a foreign enemy attacked the nation's capital, on 9/11 in 2001. The reason for 188 is that it is a number that God frequently uses to point to H188 in Strong's Hebrew Concordance, the word that means in Hebrew, woe, exclamation mark, used in the Bible in the context of extreme judgment from God. Okay, so that's the background here of what we are talking about with this Bill Buckner play, the most famous play in World Series history. Now, again, it was number one that hit the ball to Buckner. And by the way, one last thing too. Yes, okay, so it was number one that hit the ball to Buckner, number 6. That gave a 1 and a 6. And I had always wondered, or I had wondered for a long time about, the meaning of that. And it's clear that it hints at 16, which is 4 times 4, which identifies the Antichrist, or the curse of the Antichrist, right? The 44th president. But also, the pitcher, God uses pitchers on the pitching mound as symbolism for the Antichrist on the Temple Mount in Bible prophecy. The pitcher that threw the pitch that was hit by number 1, that was hit to number 6, was thrown by player number 46, the pitcher. Pitchers on the pitching mound symbolize the Antichrist on the Temple Mount. 46 is 2 times 23, which hints at 223. And 223 is the 48th prime number. And it is predicted that Barack Obama will become the 48th president. After it is predicted Michelle Obama will become the 47th president. After it is predicted that she will replace Kamala Harris after her predicted death in a plane crash into a baseball stadium in St. Louis. Okay? Also, 46 is 2 times 23, which hints at 23 pairs of chromosomes that are corrupted with the mark of the Antichrist. Okay? All right. So, and by the way, we have the Red Sox, and the mark of the Antichrist affects a person's blood, which is red. Well, anyway, let's continue with what I wrote here. So Gaetz, so this is the parallel here. Gaetz represents the 1st District of Florida, and he resigned 6 days before Harris's predicted crash into a baseball stadium, which gives us 1 and 6, and 16 equals 4 times 4, which hints at the 44th president. In the Bible, judgment symbolically begins at the gate, which is why God is using this man named Gaetz. And why it parallels with Kamala Harris's predicted plane crash at the Gateway Arch in St. Louis, because judgment on a people symbolically begins at the gate. Okay, Gaetz resigned from his seat in Washington. This is in Washington we are talking about, where Kamala Harris will be replaced with the Antichrist. The play was part of the Boston Red Sox curse and Chicago Cubs curse. Buckner was wearing his lucky Cubs batting glove inside his first baseman's glove. The curse goes back to the Red Sox-Cubs World Series in 1918 that ended on 9/11, 4-2 games, 1,260 months after the British landed at Mount Vernon before they burned down the White House and the Capitol building. 9/11, 1813 was exactly 188 years before the only other time a foreign enemy attacked the nation's capital, hence the whoa exclamation mark. Come to think of it, the Buckner cursed play was at the end of Game 6, which seems to confirm 6 days. Okay, and then these ... signify me just thinking about things for a bit, and then I come back and continue writing, and as I said, oh wow, Bill Buckner, number 6, who famously lost the game for the Red Sox at the end of Game 6. They were 1 out away. Okay, that's key. You know, that out was so key. They could have won the World Series. So Bill Buckner, number 6, who lost Game 6, died exactly 66 months before Harris's predicted death in a baseball stadium. The Gaetz nomination, as the media said, quoting the headline, unraveled in just 8 days. This is 4 plus 4 days. Judgment at the gate equals the 44th president. Also, again, it was 8 men out in 1919. 4 plus 4. And Gaetz was out of the running 4 plus 4 days after he was nominated. Gate to gate, Gaetz to Gaetz. Okay, you got it? Now, that's also amazing because Matt Gaetz was born exactly 444 months. Okay, so he fell after 4 plus 4 days, but he was born exactly 44 months before the prophetic sign at the Gateway Arch in St. Louis on May 7th, 2019, when the St. Louis Blues won Game 7 in overtime with a winning goal by hometown hero player number 7. And the game started at 7 p.m. as well. It was the same day as news regarding Obama's A Promised Land book. It was news that the book would be severely delayed in publishing, the autobiography. It was this day of Game 7 won by the hometown hero. In other words, this hockey player was from St. Louis, which is very rare because most hockey players in the NHL aren't even American, let alone from, a city like St. Louis. Okay, but anyway, he's actually from St. Louis, and he won the game for St. Louis. He's wearing number 7, and it was Game 7 in overtime. And this was 7 days before the completion of Israel's 70th anniversary year. Okay, and by the way, it was the 71st anniversary. And on that day, the headline in Washington, D.C. was that Washington, D.C. had received its wettest 365-day period in history. 365 days is a year, and this 365 days of wettest year in Washington history coincided with Israel's prophetic year, 71st year, and the rain total for that year, the 365-day period, was 71.05 inches. Okay, now that's a 3 sets of 7, okay? Because we got Game 7, the goal scored by number 7, and then 7 days to the completion of the 70th anniversary year. That's a 3 sets of 7, as I'll explain. Well, I'll just say it now. In the Bible, 3 sets of 7 is symbolic of judgment. And the Israelites, for example, enacted a symbolic 3 sets of 7 before the walls of security collapsed on Jericho. There are also three sets of 7 in the book of Genesis in the flood account. Okay, Israel. Okay, so we get now to Israel's birthday here. But Israel was born, speaking of the birth of Gaetz, Matt Gaetz, and the Gateway Arch. And by the way, Kamala Harris was born exactly 1 year, 8 months, and 8 days after the construction began on the Gateway Arch. And that hits at 188, as I just explained, is symbolic of the 188th word in the Hebrew concordance that means whoa, exclamation mark. Okay, so back to this. Israel was born exactly 144 years after Lewis and Clark began their expedition from St. Louis. May 7th, 2019, the St. Louis Blues sign was 66 days after the 144-year-old fig tree collapsed in the historic Central Plaza of Los Angeles. All right, so in the Bible, the fig tree is symbolism for Israel. Lewis and Clark began their expedition in search of a waterway to the west coast, exactly 144 years before the fig tree was reborn. And Jesus used this parable of the fig tree in the book of Matthew in his Olivet Discourse, saying that a generation would not pass after the fig tree put forth its leaves in the spring. Israel was reborn in the spring of May of 1948, and the book of Psalms tells us that a generation is 70 years, and that's why exactly on the 70th anniversary, Trump had the embassy open officially in Jerusalem. All right. Okay, so now back to what I was saying. This particular anniversary of, so Lewis and Clark began their expedition to the west coast from St. Louis. It began exactly 144 years before Israel, the fig tree, was reborn. The St. Louis Blues hockey sign was 66 days after the 144-year-old fig tree collapsed in the historic plaza in Los Angeles on the west coast, where Lewis and Clark were searching for a waterway to. Okay, the Pilgrim's Journey on the Mayflower, because Lewis and Clark had a journey, but the Pilgrim's Journey on the Mayflower took 66 days. The eclipse in 2015 that pointed to the Pilgrim's Sea Voyage, right? Maybe I'll just play a clip of that right now so you can see what I'm talking about. But that eclipse was 144,000 days after they arrived in the New World. Okay, so that's amazing. This is 144 parallel here. Okay, and this is also 400 biblical months exactly. The Pilgrims saw their crossing of the Atlantic as a parallel to the Israelites' crossing of the Jordan River after they escaped persecution from the king of Egypt. And likewise, the Pilgrims were escaping religious and political persecution from the king of England. And the Israelites escaped the persecution after their affliction of 400 years, as it says in the Bible, which is why we have this 400 years from the escape from the Pilgrims to now the timing of the Antichrist. And again, it's exactly it's exact to the month, 400 biblical years. Okay, which is the equivalent of 144,000 days. All right. Okay, so let me just play a clip to show you what the eclipse looked like, and I'll explain it. Okay, so here is an image, a visual of the eclipse that occurred on March 20th, 2015. As we can see here, this path of totality of the eclipse makes an uncanny division, a demarcation between the old world and the new world. Okay, you can see this here, okay? I mean, it goes right through here. Iceland, Greenland's part of the new world. This is Europe. This is an uncanny linear demarcation, a distinction, a drawing out between the old world and the new world. That's because God is pointing through this to the crossing of the Mayflower, which, like I just explained, happened 400 years, biblical years before this, 144,000 days. Now, March 20th, 2015 was the spring equinox, which is the day in which day and night is equal, a splitting of day and night everywhere in the world. Okay? Also, we have this eclipse that split the old world from the new world on the equinox day of day and night being split. But also, March 20th, 2015 was the first day in the Hebrew calendar, in the religious calendar, which splits the calendar from the old year from the new year. Also, this eclipse occurred in the middle of the 4 blood moon lunar eclipse tetrad. In other words, the first 2 blood moons in this prophetic tetrad occurred prior to the eclipse, and the other 2 occurred after the eclipse. So the eclipse split the old world from the new world and split the tetrad on the day that day and night is split, on the day of the calendar being split. So God really emphasized this splitting in order to communicate exactly what I have just said, is that it is a sign pointing to this 400-year period from when the Pilgrims escaped religious and political persecution from the King of England, because God is pointing to the coming Antichrist king after 400 years, because the Israelites escaped their persecution after 400 years. And their persecution came from the king of Egypt, which in the Bible is symbolism for the Antichrist king. That's the reason for all of this. This is the purpose of this eclipse. As far as I know, this is the only place on the internet that speaks of the true, deep meaning for this eclipse, which is what I have just explained. And arguably, the purpose of the blood moon tetrad is to point to this eclipse. And so therefore, the full intended meaning of the blood moon tetrad is not appreciated on the internet in this sense. One more thought regarding what I just said. One reason being that this isn't appreciated, this full, deeper meaning of the tetrad and this eclipse, is that it's not recognized everywhere, the full intended meaning of God's prophetic signs in general, which are meant for America, God's nation, God's Gentile nation. I used to, put a caveat on it, but it doesn't require a caveat. America is God's nation, period. It is biblical to say that too. God left Israel and took the gospel and used America and its sister countries to spread the gospel around the world. It's part of God's plan. For that matter, God separated Great Britain from the rest of Europe for this plan as well. But God used Great Britain to birth America. And anyway, so America is God's nation, and he is in the process of warning it before destroying it. That's the purpose of this blood moon tetrad and this eclipse. That's why God pointed to the spiritual founding of America with the Pilgrims through this eclipse. 400 years. I mean, that's so amazing because, again, the Pilgrims saw their crossing as being parallel. Their escape from persecution into the New World was like the Israelites crossing into the Promised Land. In other words, the New World was the Pilgrims' Promised Land. And that's why we have this prophetic sign involving Obama's book, A Promised Land, on the day of the St. Louis Blues sign at the Gateway Arch that revealed everything that I just explained about the Pilgrims crossing to their Promised Land. It's all connected. But that's why Obama's A Promised Land, and this identifies him as the Antichrist, for which the type of is the king of Egypt, whom the Israelites escaped persecution of after 400 years, which is why after 400 years, America is now going to have persecution of the church. And the church, why the church? Well, because America is the church, but America in general has turned away from God. That's another thing that some are confused about. America was a church nation. It's synonymous to say, today we have a distinction because there's so many people in America that don't believe in God anymore, right? But that's not what America represents. America in history was God's nation, and there was a time not long ago when every person pretty much in America believed in this God of the Bible. Okay, and so one thing on that note, this is very important. When Jesus spoke about separating the sheep from the goats in Matthew 25, he was not referring to unbelievers versus believers. In general, he's speaking to the nations that knew God. The judgment is coming for America and people that lived or are living in formerly Christian nations that have turned their back on God and know about God. And know about the God of Israel, that is. In other words, the judgment isn't coming for some people, for example, in Thailand that have never really heard the gospel, or Japan, or other places. This judgment is coming for America and the Christian nations. This end times period of the Antichrist is for persecuting the church. And that's another thing about God's big picture of signs that's not appreciated elsewhere, as far as I'm really aware. The main theme of God's big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel, is judgment warning for the church, which God is very displeased with. Okay? Now, I'll leave it at that because rather than make this a video about that subject, I've already explained it a little bit in other videos, but also if you are a Christian, and even if not, watch the 23 church signs video. Arguably, it's the most important video on this channel. As I'm saying, all of these signs are judgment for America and the church specifically. Jesus is not pleased with the church. It is the American evangelical church is the church of Laodicea that Jesus said he wants to vomit out of his mouth, and had nothing good to say about it, except that he reproves whom he loves. Okay. And so that's the purpose of the Antichrist. It's to separate the sheep from the goats, but what is that? It's separating Christians from Christians. That's what it is. Not only the separation of people in America that are descendant from Christians, but also the quote-unquote Christians as well, from the true Christians, the wheat from the chaff. That's what this is about, the separation of the sheep from the goats. The separation of Christians, people in Christian nations, the judgment on Christendom. Okay? I want to be very clear there. That's a misconception there about the parable there. It's not so-called believers versus unbelievers. And that's part of the false doctrine that gives that false interpretation of that parable that Jesus is very displeased with. In fact, he said he hates the Nicolaitan doctrine of our day, which is the doctrine of the vast majority of Christians in America, quote-unquote Christians. He hates it and is coming to make war with the sword of his mouth on those that teach and have the works that are a product of this doctrine. And yes, I said works. Read the book of Revelation. Jesus is constantly talking and evaluating their works. And to dismiss that requires this so-called dispensation new dispensation after supposedly all quote-unquote Christians will be raptured, and Jesus hates this as well. Make no mistake, I know far better than you the reason for this prediction that is being made in this video, and it is to prove what I have just said. This is the purpose of this prediction. Okay, so back to what we were saying here, though. So I've made this parallel. I've explained now the reason for the St. Louis Blues sign on May 7th, 2019, on the same day as the news regarding Obama's A Promised Land book. Okay, now, so the Pilgrim's Journey, the spiritual founding of America, was 66 days, all right? And the sign on May 7th, 2019 was 66 days after the 144-year-old fig tree fell, okay? Now, May 7th, 2019 was 188 days. Again, this whoa exclamation mark number. And again, Kamala Harris, speaking of St. Louis, was born 1 year, 8 months, and 8 days after the construction began on the Gateway Arch. But May 7th, 2019 was 188 days before the fireball flew over the Gateway Arch. There was a massive fireball that was caught, photographed, right over the Gateway Arch in St. Louis. And again, in the Bible, judgment symbolically begins at the gate. So from the St. Louis sign on the A Promised Land book day, which was again exactly 444 months after the birth of Matt Gaetz, and we are talking about A Promised Land book being written by the 44th president, and judgment beginning at the gate. That's why Gaetz being 444 months, okay? Now, this May 7th, 2019 date, at the Blues sign in St. Louis and the Promised Land book sign was 188 days after the huge fireball flew over the Gateway Arch, as in judgment at the gate. And that's what a fireball would symbolize, because, well, there is coming a massive fireball that's going to destroy America. It's the asteroid described in Revelation chapter 8. Okay, so, and the path of this fireball was parallel with the path of totality of the eclipse that passed over St. Louis. And the eclipse was the massive warning sign in 2017 of the coming judgment, as explained in other videos. Make sure you watch the Harris will crash on November 27th equals eclipse peaked at 1:17 p.m. That's an amazing video. Now, on the same day that the fireball went over the Gateway Arch in a path that was parallel to the solar eclipse was the day that Mercury transited the sun. That's also because the sun is going to knock out the power grid next August in America, which will lead to rationed food and the mark of the Antichrist being used to, or the restriction of rationed food being for buying and selling rationed food will be for only those who have taken the mark of the Antichrist. Okay. So, which is why, by the way, Kamala Harris will crash in St. Louis. Because St. Louis is near where the two eclipses crossed over each other, near over the area of the country nicknamed Little Egypt. And the eclipse in 2024 crossed over the path of totality of the 2017 eclipse exactly where it peaked. By the way, the 2017 eclipse was the first eclipse to only go over America from west coast to east coast since 1776, the symbolic year that America was born. And by the way, 1776 is 4 times 444, which hints at the 44th president, the Antichrist. Okay, so these two eclipses crossed over each other right over Cairo, Illinois, and again that hints at Egypt and it being symbolism for the king of Egypt and persecution from the Antichrist. Now, the 2024 went over the other one in 2017 and made an X over the nation, because the first one went from northwest to southeast. The second one went from southwest to northeast. It made an X over the nation, which is symbolic of the mark of the Antichrist in God's signs, the X, because the inverse of the mark of the Antichrist in Ezekiel would have been a Tav mark. In ancient Hebrew was an X. And so this X over America symbolizes the mark of the Antichrist. Furthermore, it centers over Egypt, which is symbolic of the Antichrist. Now, what are X's? They are two straight lines that cross each other at their midpoint. What is the middle date? The midpoint date of these two eclipses? December 14th, 2020, which was the day that the first American took the pointy thing outside of a trial. It was the symbolic beginning of the mark of the Antichrist. Also on that day, there was a 4.4 magnitude earthquake on the highest point of Hawaii on its northwest flank, 4.4 miles deep. Because the 44th president is from Hawaii, the name Bama means high place in the Bible and is a euphemism in the Bible for the false religious worship that the Jews would conduct on tops of mountains. This was on top of the Mauna Kea mountain in Hawaii, and it was on the northwest flank because in the Bible, the Antichrist comes from the northwest. But directly due northwest from Jerusalem is Rome. That's because the first of the two Antichrists described in Bible prophecy is the Pope Francis, and the second of one is from which and the second Antichrist is Barack Obama, from whom he gets his power from Pope Francis. I know a lot of people have the reverse, but it's not true at all. So that's why she'll crash in St. Louis. Now the X is also symbolic of the mark of the Antichrist because the mark of the Antichrist changes a person's chromosomes, and a chromosome is symbolized by an X. A pair of chromosomes. That's why. That's amazing, right? Now, okay, so let's continue here. The blues sign on May 7th, 2019 was a 3 sets of 7, as I explained, right? Player number 7, game 7, 7 days before the anniversary of Israel. It started at 7 p.m. So it was a 3 sets of 7, and it was exactly 40 weeks. Okay, so when asked by his disciples for the signs to look for of his return, Jesus replied with the metaphor of birth pains, and according to the medical profession, the average human gestation period is 40 weeks. So this is why God uses 40 weeks connections in his signs, okay? And so this blues sign was exactly 40 weeks before the blues heart attack sign that pointed to Trump's coming heart attack. Okay, so in this game, the blues player suffered a heart attack, and long story short, it was against the team named from Anaheim, the Ducks, which is named after the cartoon character Donald Duck, which is Donald Trump. It was in St. Louis, the St. Louis Blues. The St. Louis Blues is named after the most famous song, or the first big famous song in blues history, St. Louis Blues. That's the name of the song. Blues is a genre of music that typically involves trumpets. And in fact, the first playing of the song St. Louis Blues by the man named Handy, he played a trumpet. Okay, that hints at trump. In archaic English, the word trump means trumpet or the sounding of a trumpet. So this was a sign, and it was recognized at the time as being a sign that's pointing to the coming death of President Trump. Now that President Trump has won this election, it's amazing to realize how important this revelation that God has been communicating since late 2019, that President Trump will die from a heart attack. It's because the Constitution is unclear as to what would happen to someone who was elected and then died before the electors met in their meeting to elect the president-elect, because technically Trump isn't president-elect yet. That happens on December 17th, and Trump is predicted to die on December 12th. Okay? Okay. Now, Trump is symbolism for Joshua in his in God's signs, because the Israelites who were led by Joshua blew trumpets after enacting a symbolic 3 sets of 7, and then the walls of security collapsed in God's judgment, which is why Trump's presidency and election campaigns have been synonymous with his border wall of security. Okay, so Trump is, in other words, symbolic of a 3 sets of 7. Now, and that's because of the walls of security that fell in Jericho. And Gaetz fell, and Trump trumpeted his gratitude and replacement of Gaetz on November 21st, 7 plus 7 plus 7 days before Trump is predicted to fall due to a heart attack. So we have another amazing reason for this connection between Matt Gaetz and this sign on May 7th, 2019 in St. Louis with the Blues, because it connects to the Blues heart attack. And this fall of Gaetz is 7 plus 7 plus 7 days before Trump's predicted fall due to a heart attack. It's amazing. If you have already watched this introductory information, you can skip ahead 4 minutes. Hello, welcome. It is predicted that President Donald Trump will die on December 18th, 2024. As we can see here, this email documents that the prediction is being made ahead of time. The date that this video is posted proves that this prediction is being made ahead of time, as does this time-stamped email and forensic notes PDF document. If you are skeptical for some reason, please email me and I will forward these to you. December 14th revealed adding 1 plus 1 days. The star player in the Navy-Army game that Trump attended was player number 11. He scored the first touchdown on a 1-yard run, and it was in the first quarter, which also hinted at 1-1. There was 1 interception in the game, which is symbolic of the turning over of political power to the blue team after the predicted death of Trump's death. And the 1 interception was caught by player number 1 in the first quarter when the score was 7-0. And videos on this channel explain how Trump is a type for Joshua in the Bible, which is symbolized by the number 7. This 1 plus 1 days from December 14th to December 16th is also following a 1 plus 1 days from December 12th. As I will explain, the signs on December 12th, when it was announced that Trump had been named Person of the Year by Time magazine for the second time, on the same day that he rang the opening bell on Wall Street near Ground Zero, where 2 planes struck 2 towers on 9/11, indicated or revealed adding 2 days to December 12th. And so from December 12th, which I will talk about in this video, we received the signs that indicated adding 2 days to get December 14th, which was the day of the Army-Navy game, which revealed adding 1 plus 1 days or 2 days to get December 16th. December 16th was another step in the trail of signs leading to Trump's predicted death, and the signs on December 16th revealed adding another 2 days to reach December 18th, also another step in the trail of signs. On December 16th, there was a school shooting in which the shooter killed 2 people. And the call into 911 was made by a 2nd grader. The 2 deaths and the call made by the 2nd grader hinted at the predicted deaths of 2 political leaders, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. And so, from the day that Trump rang the opening bell on Wall Street near Ground Zero, where 2 planes struck 2 towers, when at the same time Time magazine announced that Trump had been named Person of the Year for a second time, it is 2 plus 2 plus 2 days to December 18th. The date of another extremely prophetic sign on Wall Street. This is astounding because it was through the 9/11 events in Lower Manhattan near Wall Street that God pointed to President George Washington, who was inaugurated on Wall Street, and George Washington was born on the date 2/22, which is why we received a second prophetic sign on Wall Street 2 plus 2 plus 2 days, after he was named the Person of the Year for a second time near where 2 planes struck 2 towers in God's warning of judgment and destruction for the nation on 9/11. This is also the prophetic reason why Trump is predicted to die before his second presidency, 2 days after Kamala Harris is predicted to die in a plane crash. This is also why the call made to 911, which hints at 9/11, was made by the second grader in the shooting that killed 2 people. On 9/11, 2 planes struck 2 towers near Wall Street. Trump is predicted to die 2 days after it is predicted that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash in the 8+8+8th state to join the Union. The name Donald J. Trump is equal to 888 in English gematria, and the name of Jesus in Greek is equal to 888 in Greek gematria. The name Trump is equal to 88 in simple English gematria. A = 1, B = 2, C = 3. Trump is predicted to die 8 days after the second prophetic sign on Wall Street that occurred on December 18th. On 9/11, Trump called into the local TV news station and inadvertently trumpeted that his tower on Wall Street had become the tallest tower in Lower Manhattan. In the events of 9/11 is the story of the heroes of the 88th floor. The Tribute in Lights art installation that commemorated the Twin Towers was made up of 88 searchlights. According to Wikipedia, there are 88 places in America named Washington. Through the 9/11 events, God pointed to George Washington, who was inaugurated at the founding of the nation on Wall Street, after which he marched down Wall Street to Trinity Chapel, where he then consecrated the nation to God, saying that if the nation were to ever turn away from God, it would lose its divine protection and blessings. God's divine protection and blessings were temporarily removed on 9/11 as a warning for America, and God confirmed this through the fact that Trinity Chapel was the only building at Ground Zero to have survived the falling debris and did not even suffer a broken window due to the uprooted sycamore tree that sheltered the chapel. Today, outside what is now nicknamed the Miracle Chapel, there is a 20-foot-high bronze statue of the roots of this tree to commemorate this. These events on 9/11 pointed to God's warning in Isaiah chapter 9, verse 11 in the Bible for ancient Israel when it was raided by the ancient Assyrians who uprooted the, quote, sycamore trees, unquote, and caused, quote, the bricks have fallen, unquote. The collapse of the towers on 9/11 engendered a small earthquake that cracked the foundation of Federal Hall on Wall Street, where President Washington was inaugurated at the founding of the nation. It symbolized the foundation of America, which is the God of Israel and the God of the Bible, Jesus Christ, being cracked. Trump's first election campaign and presidency were synonymous with his border wall of security. The word Trump in archaic English means trumpet, or the sounding of a trumpet. Before the walls of security of Jericho collapsed in God's judgment, as described in the Bible, the Israelites blew trumpets. On 9/11, Trump called into Channel 9 News and trumpeted that his tower on Wall Street had become the tallest tower in Lower Manhattan, and Wall Street was named after the 9-foot-high wall of security that the Dutch built to keep the British and the Indians out. God repeats a number 3 times for emphasis of its symbolic meaning, and the name Wall Street is equal to 45 plus 45 plus 45. The 45th president's first election campaign and the 45th presidency were synonymous with America's southern border wall of security. Trump was shot in the ear as he was talking about the border wall of security. The border wall of security collapsed after the 45th president left office. Trump is predicted to die on the 20th anniversary of the Indian Ocean tsunami that killed 220,000 people. On 9/11, a total of 220 stories collapsed, as each tower was 110 stories high. After 9/11, America sent its military into Afghanistan, and on the 20th anniversary, its operations there dramatically collapsed in another warning of God's impending judgment and destruction of America. The inverse of the number 45, in other words, 1 divided by 45, is equal to 0.0222. This is why the 45th president will die on the 20th anniversary of the 220,000 deaths in the Indian Ocean tsunami, 2 days after the death of the vice president, who is of Indian descent. As a result of these 2 deaths, the 44th president, who grew up in Indonesia for 4 years, will become the president again. And the tsunami 20 years ago was triggered by a magnitude 9 earthquake in Indonesia. 45 is the 9th triangular number. In a triangle of numbers, the last number in the 9th row is 45. Obama was inaugurated in 2009, and he will serve a second presidency that will have skipped the 45th presidency. The inverse of 45 is 0.0222, and exactly 222 months after the events of 9/11 that pointed to Washington, who was born on the date 222, was the 45th president's Oval Office speech regarding the CVD disease that ended precisely as the clock on the live TV news screen ticked 9:11 p.m. Trump's CVD disease speech was on the same day that the begins with a W, ends with an HO declared that it had become begins with a pen, ends with a demic, on the same day that the first professional athlete tested positive who played for the team from the 45th state, the Utah Jazz, and jazz is a genre of music that typically uses trumpets. Exactly 9 months after Trump's CVD disease Oval Office speech was the day of Trump's Oval Office speech regarding the approval of the thing by the begins with an F, ends with a D and A on that day. The approval of the thing was exactly 9 months and 222 months after the events of 9/11 that pointed to the inauguration of Washington on Wall Street, which was named after the 9-foot-high wall of security, and Washington was born on the date 222. The second prophetic sign on Wall Street on December 18th was 2 + 2 + 2 days after Trump was named Time's Person of the Year for the second time, while he rang the opening bell on Wall Street near where 2 planes struck 2 towers. The top news story on December 18th was how the Dow lost 1,123 points. 1,123 is the 188th prime number, and God uses this number to point to H188 in Strong's Hebrew Concordance, which is the Hebrew word that means woe! It is used in the Bible in the context of extreme judgment from God. The events of 9/11 that pointed to President George Washington occurred exactly 188 years after the only other time a foreign enemy attacked the nation's capital. On 9/11 in 1813, the British landed at Washington's Mount Vernon estate and then proceeded to burn down the Capitol building and the White House, but not before First Lady Dolly Madison famously rescued the portrait of George Washington. The Wall Street stock market loss on December 18th that pointed to the number 188 occurred 8 days before the predicted death of Trump. Trump's death will symbolize the long-last blast of the trumpets by the Israelites before the walls of security of Jericho collapsed in God's judgment. Trump's death will be the last Trump sign, and it will symbolize the collapse of America's walls of security and the beginning of the destruction of the nation. The loss on Wall Street on December 18th was blamed on the decision and statements by the 16th chairman of the Federal Reserve. The 16th president, Abraham Lincoln, was assassinated, as will Trump be assassinated. The name Abraham is equal to 44 in simple English gematria. Trump's death, the last trumpet sign, will be 4 + 4 days after the loss on Wall Street that was blamed on the 4 × 4th chairman of the Federal Reserve, who was appointed to the Federal Reserve Board of Governors by the 44th president. After Trump's death and the last trumpet sign, the 44th president will become the president again. As outlined in the 20th Amendment, Obama will become a quote-unquote temporary president. This is why Trump, the 45th president, will die on the 20th anniversary of the tsunami that killed 220,000 people. The inverse of the number 45 is the number 0.0222. Gaetz was born exactly 37 years, which in itself is a 3 sets of 7, before the St. Louis Blues 3 sets of 7 sign on May 7th, 2019. This is also exactly 444 months. Gaetz fell 4 + 4 days after he was nominated, but he also fell 6 days before Harris's predicted fall from the sky, which points to player number 6 in Game 6, Bill Buckner, who died exactly 66 months before Harris's predicted death in a baseball stadium. May 7th, 2019 was 66 days after the fig tree fell, and May 7th, and that's because, again, of the 66 days of the Mayflower crossing, and May 7th, 2019 was also exactly 66 months and 6 days before Trump nominated Gaetz, who then fell. It's amazing. It's all amazing. Did you get that? Okay, because Gaetz is pointing to this number 6 in Game 6, and Gaetz also points to this day that was 66 days after the fig tree fell. But this day is also 66 months and 6 days before Trump nominated Gaetz, who then fell. It's amazing. Believe me, I know far better than you how the prediction made in this video was derived. And more importantly, I know far better than you why the righteous Christian God of the Bible has given me a voice through this prediction. If you are a quote-unquote Christian or Muslim, this prediction was not learned through a demon. Be warned that blaspheming the Holy Spirit is the unforgivable sin. If you are a New Ager or New Spirituality person, this prediction was not learned through somehow tapping into the supposed universal collective consciousness. If you are a conspiracy theorist, this prediction was not learned through figuring out a supposed code that the Illuminati and Satanists are using. This prediction was learned through the Bible and through watching carefully the Lord's prophetic signs, which Jesus commanded all Christians to do. Besides proving that Jesus Christ is the Lord, the reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction is to prove that the controversial things that I am saying in the videos on this channel are the truth. Therefore, a wise person will want to watch all of the videos on this channel. What I will also do is create a video or two that summarizes some of the controversial things that the Lord will prove to be true when the prediction being made in this video comes to pass. I will leave links to these must-watch videos in the description box below this video. Again, the purpose of this prediction, that is from God, is to prove these things that I will talk about. And therefore, it would be foolish to not watch the videos that I will leave links for in the description box below this video. Aliens and UFOs are demons masquerading as aliens and UFOs. Most people's spiritual experiences are demonic deception, especially if they are not a true follower of Christ. In the last days, many people who claim to be a follower of Christ will have spiritual experiences that are in reality demonic. God became a man and died a horrible death at the hand of the ruler of this world, Satan, and then defeated death for you, so that you too can overcome death, which is the price that must be paid for sin. It is time to repent, which means to change one's ways and turn to God and become a disciple of Jesus. Please leave a like and upvote the video, and once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more, don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. It is essential that everyone immediately read the homepage of my website, TrumpPrediction.com. If you are watching this on the YouTube platform, please note that not all of the videos are on YouTube. You need to switch to the Odyssey.com or Rumble.com channel, and do it now in case you aren't able to later.